Okay, we are on air. We are on air. So, and okay, we have two Googlers today, which is absolutely incredible for our format. Well, so we have our usual Andrey Lipattsev.
Hi everyone.
From Dublin office. He feel Irish today. And we have John. We have John the Twist from Switzerland. Well, some people, I guess, they don't need to be introduced. Well, I will introduce everyone, and I will do it usual way. I will do it from on my screen from left to right, as exactly Google told me to do. We have Ammon Johns. Ammon Johns is, well, it's what it says on the tin, internet marketing consultant, ammonjohns.com. Yeah, from United Kingdom. We have Bill Slavsky. It's exactly what it says here. Goldfish Digital SEO by Bill Slavsky. And we have Eric. And it's so easy for me. It's everyone has a low thought. Yeah, and we have Jennifer. Jennifer, she's the first time we have a lady with us. Jennifer Slack, the SEM post. And Google's already introduced. So I guess we can just start. Ammon, will you take control as usual?
I don't know where this has come from, but yeah, I mean, this is. Let me give the quick introduction. It's one of those topics where, when we knew we wanted to focus on a topic this time, duplicate content leapt out as one that is of great interest to all levels. Whether you're a first-time webmaster, whether you're a long-term SEO, it's something we're all going to have to deal with. And if anything, it's becoming more and more of an issue to consider, because we're dealing now with lots of tracking codes. There's still things like affiliate IDs, which all go to the same page. We worry about whether our tracking codes with UTM codes through Twitter or other social platforms are going to create duplicate content. So it's something that's increasingly an issue. And of course, the most common word platform out there is WordPress, and that creates a short form URL and a long form URL, and often a search friendly URL as well, and that's 3 URLs even before you deal with domain canonicalization issues. So it's one of those ones we knew we wanted to really sort of cover this week. But Bill, you missed the last hangout. I had to channel you, so I thought we'd give you the first question. Let's go.
Well, I appreciate you channeling me last hangout, and thank you for that, and I'll take over from here. So there is supposedly, we've been told, there's no such thing as a duplicate content penalty at Google, but sometimes duplicate content is penalized. When does that happen? And is it something like syndicated content an area of at risk for that type of penalization?
I let Andrey answer this question. We need to have like some secret hand sign, I think.
Yes, like that. Well, like I do this, that means you have to answer. No, you heard right. There is no duplicate content penalty. The rest of the question, because I focus on the first part, the penalty. No, there is no penalty. So that's easier. The rest of it, because the rest of it hinges on the assumption that there is, and since there isn't, I'm not sure how to answer the rest of it. You ask me.
Well, maybe I can chip in here a little bit.
Instead, there's no duplicate content penalty except when it's used in a spamful way to manipulate search results at Google.
True, but even there, Bill, I would avoid talking about duplicate content penalties for spam purposes, because then it's not about duplicate content. Then it's about generating, very often in an automated way, content that is not so much duplicated as kind of parsed and scraped from multiple places, and then potentially probably monetized in some way or another, and it just doesn't serve any purpose other than to gain traffic, redirect traffic, maybe make some money for the person who created it. This is not about content that gets really sort of created for any kind of reason other than just to be there. So I personally don't think about it as duplicate content. that's just spam. It's the same thing as saying that automatically created gibberish is some sort of a duplicate content of words that otherwise also exist. Like I would really separate those two issues, because the things that Ammon led in with, URLs generated on WordPress, and the things that we're going to discuss today later, maybe about e-commerce sites and so on, I wouldn't want people to confuse those two.
I asked this because once upon a time I was a administrator in the forum, and we got a lot of questions from people, and that was one of the common questions we received from people.
Absolutely.
Am I under a duplicate content penalty?
Yeah. Well,
people
so
wanted to do that often.
there isn't one, right?
It's a little bit a case of semantics, because the duplication filter, i.e. you notice there's 6 copies of this, Google only needs to show 1 in the results. It's not that it hasn't indexed the content, it's not that it's penalized the content, but at the point of results you can see that these are very, very similar, and it will just show the highest ranked one.
That is in no way a penalty, right?
No,
and
but do you see how to the second ranked person who's now not shown, that seems like a penalty to them?
It's very rare that you would have 2 people in this equation, and I think we're going to come to this later on today, but it's very rare that you would see 2 separate websites. And to my knowledge, probably almost never you would see 2 websites under such conditions. When you're talking about URLs containing the same content, this is probably the same website we're talking about, you know?
I'm actually thinking much more of issues like when a manufacturer has given a default blurb and then several retailers have used that exact text, and we do see this quite a lot. We see it less nowadays because SEOs have made people a lot more aware of this. Google Hangouts have made people a lot more aware of this, but it was still an issue, and I'm still seeing it in some products, particularly in furniture. Often with designer furniture, the designer's description of that furniture is used across dozens of sites with very minor changes.
Yeah, well, that is absolutely not a problem at all, either for furniture or consumer electronics or anything else you might want to use. I don't know, I mean, there's tons of stuff you could add to that.
So I guess there are two different things that we need to look at. On the one hand, when the whole page is duplicated, that's kind of the easy situation where we can tell, well, this is probably exactly the same thing. We can kind of skip that. And the other one is what you're talking about when a part of the page is duplicated. So like that furniture blurb, what a lot of sites have, maybe the footer, or maybe they have some kind of disclaimer on the bottom, those kind of things where we see this chunk of text duplicated across a whole lot of different pages. And what happens in those cases is we index all of those pages because the rest of the page is kind of unique and kind of valuable. So we index those pages. And then when it comes to generating the search results, if we can tell that actually the part that people are searching for is duplicated across all of these pages, then we'll pick one of these pages and show it because they're essentially equivalent. So if you have, I don't know, the default blurb for a piece of furniture and someone searches for a piece of text within that default blurb, then we'll know, well, this is the same text on all of these sites. The snippet would be the same thing. So it doesn't really make sense to show all of these different pages to that user at that time. Of course, as soon as we know more about the query, as soon as it's not just from that duplicated piece of text, then it's a lot easier for us to say, well, this is the one that really matches what this user is looking for. So for furniture, maybe the location. Maybe if they have additional details in the query about that type of furniture they're looking for. So all of these things can help us to figure out which one of these pages with that duplicated blurb is the one that we want to show to people.
Okay, so people shouldn't think of that as a penalty. They should consider it as a risk that they may not be the one shown because they're using the same text.
Yeah, to some extent, but it's not that I'd say I mean, it's definitely not a penalty because we're not penalizing any of these sites for having the same text. We just see, well, for the user, it doesn't make sense to show all of these copies of the same thing. So something where it makes sense to kind of have your own content on the one hand, but on the other hand, since we're already trying to figure out which one of these is the right one, that's something that usually we just figure out on our side.
And also, you mentioned the word risk, and there really it's probably worth clarifying what is the risk of, because as John has said, we might want to choose a particular page if a user is searching for an exact piece of text, but people don't really do that unless they're actually just looking for that piece of text and nothing else, and then there is no risk. What you're risking a lot more is that if you're not actually generating anything useful, unique, creative, found nowhere else to go with your product offering. Reviews, I don't know, how-tos, videos displaying installation, whatever, the sort of stuff that people are actually interested in. And then the issues of what particular blurb of text appears on what description really becomes very secondary.
So it becomes a question of whether or not you're showing off some type of expertise.
Yeah, yeah.
Authoritativeness.
I mean, that kind of goes back to what I mentioned as well, where when we can tell that the query matches something that's otherwise unique on your site, that kind of makes it different from the rest, then we'll show your site in a case like that. So if for example, different furniture stores show the same blurb of text and we know your location matches the location of one of these stores, maybe we can match that. On the other hand, if these are all different affiliate shops which are essentially online and there's nothing kind of unique among these sites, then of course there's no reason for us to pick one over the other, and you might not get chosen. So really finding something where you can add unique value, I think that's really critical.
So let's take a different angle on that, though. What about Macy's versus, I don't know, Nordstrom's versus, so several large retailers selling very similar products. Maybe, yes?
I've got a great example for that. Think of Amazon and eBay, where the same seller is selling on both sites and has put the same description up. He's put the same content on both sites. He's selling.
Well, that's another flavor of it, and I think that's worth exploring. But I don't want to lose the idea of major retailers who are competing with each other, actually selling different things, and it's very similar. So the question is, let's say that they have pages like most of these people, Ammon's scenario and mine both, where it's long lists of products, just a brief description, and there's, for the most part, well, maybe they have reviews, but on a lot of these pages, there's not really anything else on the page. So is there some aspect of something else that might cause more than one of those to show up, like authority or...
John may correct me on this, but I would expect that, for example, in the case of whatever retailers we're talking about here, all of them to show up, the ones that we know about. If we're talking about a particular brand of furniture or electronics or whatever, and there's multiple shops offering it, and they have, as shops, we have sufficient information to say that these are things that people like to go to, and I see no reason for the same piece of electronics being sold across multiple shops not to show up in results for discovering. We see plenty of examples of that.
So being in demand is a solution. I mean, without worrying about how we define demand at the moment.
We need to.
I think it's. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think it's not so much demand. It's really about being unique, like being clearly different than the rest that's out there. So kind of bringing your unique flavor into that. Like when you talk about Amazon versus eBay, those are very different sites. It's like people go to those sites for very different reasons. So it's not the case that we could say, well, it's like equivalent. We can just swap them out. Nobody would notice. Similar with like offline retailers. In a lot of cases, these are very unique sites, and people go to one or the other. They want to have the choice.
If you look at them as well, they're often rewriting the content as well. We did a comparison that was Macy's and another site that were selling the same products, and one of the two sites had rewritten their descriptions for the identical product. They weren't just lifting it off whatever the manufacturer sent them as well.
I think that a lot of the time copyright is underrated. I think the answer we're getting to here is that duplicate content is a lot less of an issue for Google than it is for your customers. If you've got the exact same description as everybody else, that's not an ideal position to be marketing from.
Well, I'm
because
not
what
sure
sticks out to the user is the one that was different.
I would be careful about introducing this piece of advice, because in some cases that's totally fine. There's certain pieces of equipment, I don't know, I have this in front of me. This is an Apple pad, I guess. There's only so many ways in which you can describe it. It's a thing. Apple makes it. Anybody who sells it is going to sell it exactly the same way. It's what John was saying. What sort of a platform are you? And again, to Eric's point, it's not about demand. It's not about the fact that, okay, we know you've existed for 10 years and therefore you're awesome. It's about what are you offering right now? What are people finding great about your platform in general? And then if there are things like that, you shouldn't at all worry about what words appear to accompany the actual product. Well, to a certain degree.
Sure. But then again, for a small...
I was just going to channel the usual thing that comes out of this. Think of the user. It's kind of that way, isn't it?
What? The user?
Yeah, I know.
Oh, shocking. But for a small retailer, then I guess the challenge is that if they're up and coming, they're going to have to. And this is not necessarily the wrong answer. I'm not saying this is bad. I'm just trying to be clear and helpful to people who are listening who are in this situation. They have to focus a lot of energy on making sure that they provide clear signals of differentiation in order to make their way and start to begin to gain some share. And that's just, if you're going to try to start a new retail or e-tail site, you just have to accept that challenge.
Yeah, and you're not going to solve it by rewriting your descriptions. That's another thing that people need to understand.
Right, it has to be more than that.
Yeah, and again, and even that shouldn't be the first thing you think about, and then it shouldn't be the thing you think about at all. Because you should think about, okay, so I have plenty of competition in my space. What am I going to do? And changing, a couple of words is not going to be your defining criteria. The thing that makes or breaks a business.
Right. There's a great example that I like to share in presentations sometimes. It's a company based in Burlington, Vermont. They sell cleaning fluids, paper towels, toilet paper, and other household goods. The company's called Seventh Generation. And what they did in their site is they took from top to bottom, they built in a whole eco-friendly theme. In fact, their homepage is dominated with eco-friendly content. And so their whole positioning is around their eco-friendliness. And I think they've done actually quite well. And that's what they did. They entered with probably the worst product line imaginable to write about. Well, I can think of worse ones. But anyway, we'll leave that aside. A really hard one to write about. And they found an angle, and they differentiated themselves.
Yeah. And this is one thing that, Bill and I and all of us actually on this panel are always pointing out. SEO is not an alternative for marketing. It's a support for marketing. Get the marketing right and then have the SEO that makes it work properly.
Right.
The days of tricking the engine, well, they never really worked, but they're long, long past. Jen, I know you had a question about sort of boilerplate areas of pages, and I thought that might lead into something that Eric had asked earlier about shingles.
Yeah, so are there instances when boilerplate, like your navigation, your footer, your header, is going to cause duplicate content? I hear this question a lot from people with like photo sites, something that doesn't have too much differentiating content across pages.
So it is duplicate content, but I mean, technically, it's the same text that you have across these pages. But especially when it comes to boilerplate, we're really good at recognizing boilerplate and at understanding which part of those pages we should be focusing on. So that's something that search engines all kind of have to learn, in that a lot of websites have this kind of boilerplate, which could be something on the bottom, top, or side, or wherever on the page. And they kind of have to figure out what that is so that they can kind of devalue that boilerplate in the search results. So that's not the primary content of the page, and we can focus on other things which are more important there. So what happens there is we recognize the duplicate content, this type of boilerplate, and we say, well, this is across the whole site or across parts of the site, and we know it's associated with your page, but it's not the primary content. So if someone searches for something that's in the primary content, we'll be able to bubble that up. When someone searches for something that's only in the boilerplate, we'll probably just pick one of these pages and say, well, we have a lot of these. Here's one of them. But usually people don't search for the boilerplate. It's not that interesting.
Yeah. A related question to that is, there's a technique I used to use, which was where you've got quite a large block of text or something that's got to occur on lots of pages. What I used to do was embed that in an iframe. Now these days I'm much less likely to do that because of responsive design and having to worry about more and more devices all getting the same thing. Has Google got to the point where we don't have to worry about that anymore, that it treats it just like navigation elements, or should we still be thinking of ways to reduce that duplication?
I think that time has kind of passed. So it used to be like the iframe thing you could do, or some people put it in JavaScript. But we understand iframes, we understand JavaScript, we've picked that up anyway. So there's still ways you could do that if you wanted to really hide it from Google. But in general, if it's just boilerplate, if it's just something that's kind of like you have to put it on those pages because for legal reasons or whatever, it's just there. We have to live with that. We have a lot of practice kind of dealing with that kind of content. I think it's trickier when it's content that you absolutely don't want to have shown up in search. So if you need to put your address on all of your pages, which I think is the case in Germany, and you really don't want your address found in search, then you start kind of still going with those tricks where you put it in an image, for example, something like that. But for normal boilerplate where you say, well, it doesn't matter what Google does with this, I just don't want my pages to be seen as primarily about this, you don't have to do anything.
I don't see many uses for that, but I have seen one recently, which was quite interesting. It's a site that when a user arrives on the page, it uses their IP to determine which telephone number and office to display as their local one, because it's using geolocation, and that it didn't want the spider's location necessarily dictating it, as that could then end up in results all over the place. So yeah, that's sort of one thing where that can be legitimate. So shingles, I mean, is this kind of where we're coming in here? Should we explain shingles to people so they can understand one of the ways that duplication is recognized? And
unless you're teaching a course at university about the website, about sort of search engine creation, you really don't need to.
Well, I think the other thing to mention is if you go to Google and you just search for shingles, you'll probably get something completely different. So you need to understand that you kind of want to search for web search shingles, or n-grams, they're commonly called, to kind of get more information on that. And the Wikipedia pages are really good about that. But essentially, what shingles do is they help us to understand how much of a page is unique and how much of a page is kind of copied from other sources. And usually, as a webmaster, you don't really have to bother with that. One exception, I'd say, is if you have a lot of user-generated content on your site and you kind of want to make sure that they're not copying each other's content or publishing something on your site that was published somewhere else, then with shingles, you can kind of figure that out. So it basically takes blocks of the text and compares that.
But even there, I wouldn't really want to scare all the forum platform owners into thinking that they need to worry about this too much. At the end of the day, if users kind of create a lot of copy from each other and then restart old flames and whatever, it's just life. So that's
one reason why I wanted to bring this up is just so that people understand that if I take a page that has 4 shoes listed on it from lowest to highest price, and I sort it now from highest to lowest price, or randomize it, and it shows the same 4 pages, that those are still duplicates because of shingles, right? Because you see that it has the same blocks of content on them. And so I think it's just important for people to know that duplication doesn't mean exact duplication. It means kind of like practical duplication. And that's the reason why I want to bring it up, not because I want to turn everybody into search engineers or anything of that kind.
Yeah. That's a really good point. So that's a great example. I have to remember that one. Another thing that we sometimes get with regards to duplicate content, and kind of like the shingles kind of goes into that, is if you translate content, is that still duplicate content? And of course, from our point of view, we look at the words themselves, like the shingles, and we say, well, these are different shingles, these are different words, so it's definitely not duplicate content in a case like that. So if you have your content in multiple page language variations, you can basically ignore the rest of the hangout here.
There you go. Well, if that's your only word.
Well, not everything. Not everything. Okay.
Don't go away just yet.
We may add something new and unique and different. So, with e-commerce websites, it's often something people do. They add faceted search. They have different ways of filter and sort. And been thinking about how structured data markup, where you use unique identifiers for products and so on, can help search engine understand pages and content on them better and avoid duplicate content. How helpful is that to you all, having structured data like that?
I think structured data is awesome in general and very helpful. I was going to say just not for this purpose, but in reality there is no purpose here. The structured data in its presence has nothing to do with whether content also exists somewhere else or not. These are separate things. In general, allowing us to understand the structure of the page, the relationships between items on the page and on the website is great.
Mm-hmm. If you have a series of pages that are showing products off, like prices, high to low, and prices low to high, the search engine knows it's 2 series that cover the same products.
Yep, we would tend to know that, and I think it's going back to what John was saying before, right? It's going to if we haven't figured out that this is exactly the same stuff, we'll have to base our choice on the exact situation, who is searching for what and where. If we have figured out that it's the same, it'll probably be helpful for everybody all around because it'll make everybody's life easier. And you can help us do that if you structure your URLs, for example, correctly. But even filtering your prices or sorting your prices low to high and high to low, that's not really about structured data, is it? This is something else now. This is more about your own parameters.
That decides how your pages get shown to people.
Yeah, it does do that, but I don't see now the relationship with structured data anymore.
So I think that the other part, of course, is for structured data, we kind of require that it's reflected in the visible part of the page too. So if you have duplication in the visual part of your page and you have different structured data, then somehow that structured data isn't really set up correctly. So
right.
It's really, you need to fix the pages first.
That's spam.
It's actually one of the tests, it's one of the examples we used years ago when people were talking about the duplicate content penalty. We took a database which had 50,000 items in it. It was albums, records, actual vinyl ones after CDs had come along and everyone were looking at these funny black CDs. We had lots of ways of sorting this, and we had options to see it with the album covers and without, and with reviews and without. And altogether, that 50,000 items could be displayed as 500,000 different pages. And Google had no problem indexing these. It had no problem getting the whole site indexed. It didn't have duplicate content penalties, but Google would determine which it thought was the most relevant for any given search, and one page was shown. We don't need 50,000 pages to show. We need one that's good for the customer, and it worked, and that was the go-to example for years to show to people there is no such thing as a duplicate content penalty. That's kind of like saying, well, sometimes it rains. Is that a water penalty from above? No, it's just a factor. It's just how things work.
If we want to go back to structured data for a second, I think this is a really good example of what we've been talking about before at the beginning. But if we want to go back to structured data and faceted navigation for a second, something that we get asked quite a bit, and actually people also get wrong quite a bit, is what to set as the canonical version in, for example, in a set of pages of an article. If it's a multi-page publication, what should be done with that? And a common mistake would be to set, for example, to tell us, well, a mistake insofar as we would have to ignore that information, and it wouldn't be useful to us. That if you tell us that the first page of the article is the canonical version of all the other pages, which is not. The correct thing to do would be here.
Self-referential, yeah.
Well, it's self-referential, but also I think what here, if we talk about faceted navigation, if you have either a category page and then all the products appear there, or you have an article where the entire article is available, but you also break it down into pages, then you could use that and tell us, well, so these are all the pages. That's how they're all related with Rel Next and Rel Prev. But this is also the canonical version of each of these pages where everything is available. That's helpful. But again, if you don't do it, it's not deadly, it's not hurtful, it's not harmful in any kind of way. We'll try to figure it out.
I'm going to quickly dive back to a question, because I think we kind of jumped straight into very specific examples of duplicate, and so I wanted to say, some of the common causes of duplicate are poor canonicalization, the WordPress sites that we mentioned, where there's lots of different ways of getting there, different query strings that will work, shortcode versions where we've got affiliate strings and all kinds of things like that. And of course, then there's the near duplicate and boilerplate. So those are some of the things, and where you've got locational as well. I've got a site for Canada, I've got a site for the US, I've got a site for the UK. They're all in English. I've effectively created 3 copies, but there's some small differences, even if it's only the locations or what the pricing is in. But what other causes does Google see of duplication? Is there anything we're missing from that list, kind of thing, that is increasingly an issue, or that just doesn't tend to get mentioned enough and people miss?
I think that kind of covers pretty much everything. So you have the partial duplication, you have the full duplication, you have that internally across sites. That's kind of what we notice. Yeah.
Is there a scenario that I could add to that, which is that you have 2 different pages that are different in many respects, but there is like one block of content on each of those pages which happens to relate specifically to a user query, even though much of the page doesn't. Both those pages would tend to trigger for that same block of text, which happens to be duplicate, even though the rest of the page is not. Is that also?
We're running into
that's kind of partial duplicate content again. That's kind of the same situation. If it's in a boilerplate or if it's somewhere else within the text, it's this block of text that you have copied across those pages.
Right.
But also, I think we're running a little bit with partial duplication. That's a really good way to think about this. But also, maybe sometimes we're going too far with the worrying about it, because if you think you only have a limited number of words in any given language, so perforce all of them will be duplicated all over the place. Right? We don't tend to worry about that. So I think we need to get used to thinking about bigger pieces of text along the same lines. Like, it's okay, yes. We encounter the same words across many pages, that's fine.
One specific I saw come up in the questions around this, and I've certainly seen it around a lot. These days, a lot of people are using social media, and a lot of people are cross-posting to many different platforms, essentially creating the same content in several different places. Is that an issue other than for users? I mean, I've always said it's an issue because often the people who follow you on one platform also follow you on another, and it's annoying as hell for them to get 4 different notifications for the same post. But is it an issue for Google? Is this a bad practice and something they should avoid, or is it a non-issue?
So I guess you're kind of competing with yourself with the same content. So you're spreading yourself thin. Theoretically, you could be doing that. I mean, you could like try to spread the word as far as possible, but you only have a limited time to spend to promote all of these pieces of content. So if you're just spreading the word out everywhere, then chances are none of those are really going to be strong versions of your content. It's like a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit here. It makes it really hard for us to say, well, this is the authoritative source. We should show this very high in the search results.
But there could be different scenarios, John. We do this ourselves. When we do Hangouts on air, we announce them on Twitter and on Google+. That's fine. But we have different followerships in different places, and so do people. So, like, yes, you could spread yourself thin, but also there might be legitimate reasons to do it. And the last person you need to think about, or the last entity you need to think about when doing that is Google. Like you need to make decisions based on the time that you have and where your followers are and so on. We'll figure it out. We'll build another data center, I guess.
Jen, did you have another one?
I'm sure I do.
If not, I know Eric does. He always does.
So we often hear about people complaining that their content's getting stolen and it's being outranked, or the other sites are outranking them. How well is Google able to identify the sources, especially we see RSS duplication where stuff's being published pretty much at the same time and it's not as easy to identify, kind of like the first one? And is there anything the site owners can do to kind of tell Google, hey, we're the original, ignore all the rest of them?
Is this one of the ones that's sometimes a tricky issue anyway for Google? Because let me come up with one real-world place where that can happen legitimately. You've got a small local news outfit, and they cover a story. They put out an article, and then it gets syndicated, and it goes statewide, and then it gets picked up again by the network, and it goes national. Now, most of the time when somebody's searching for the article, there's more chance they saw the national coverage and expect the national one. So is that the one that Google should show? Or should Google be trying to backtrack and find the original local news that started it?
I mean, from what I've seen, we do a pretty good job at recognizing which one to show, which is kind of the original source. So I think for the common cases where you mentioned, where people are like scraping an RSS feed, that's something we should pick up fairly well. And I'm sure there are individual situations where we don't get that right, and that would be something useful to have. But for the most part, I think we're really good at that at the moment. One thing that people sometimes suggest is, well, if I just had a way of giving Google this content directly, then it would know that I am the original source and all of the others are copies. And the main problem we really run into there is just that oftentimes spammers are very technically savvy. Like they'll be able to take your feed and submit it to Google before you even click the submit button, more or less. So that's something where in the end, we run into the same problem again. We have to figure out which one to kind of show there. Another thing that kind of comes in the similar theme is when someone takes your content, copies it into a blog post, and adds some comments to it, where technically they're duplicating your content, but actually it's not really the same thing. Like they're adding some kind of additional value there. And in a case like that, we wouldn't see that as a copy. We might say, well, this blog post that's writing about your content is actually more relevant to the user's query because of this additional information that's placed there. So it's not always the case that we would say, well, we'd show the original source on top and never show any of the copies, because sometimes the copies are really useful on their own.
One of the things that I always say about the internet is, it's a great medium for derivative works and for mashups, and to take what somebody has done and then add your own twist or add something to it or mix it with something else. And I know Google wouldn't want to stop that, but it must at times be quite a tricky thing to actually place a line for, mustn't it?
Yeah, I know that the team that's working on trying to recognize the original content and rank that appropriately, they sometimes run into tricky situations where it's really hard, where even when you look at it manually, you're like, well, which one of these is the one that we should be showing? It's not always that obvious.
How do you recognize those people? Are they the one that with the jitters? Are they the people who always look really nervous?
I don't know.
Eric, you must have another question.
Always. So this is a little bit of an extension of the duplicate content concept, so forgive me for that. But one of the things that a lot of retail sites worry about is, okay, since I used the shoe example, I'll stay there. I've got my men's shoes, and then I've got my men's running shoes, and then I've got my men's Adidas running shoes, and then I have my men's Adidas running shoes by shoe size, color, and these sorts of things. And one of the things that you need to do when you're trying to, well, when you get into all this granularity, where all these things are seen as duplicates of each other, there is a point where you transition beyond, I think, where you have duplicates to where it really starts to be about thin content, or just a glut of pages gets so large where you're not seeing much that's different, that it's harmful to the site from a search perspective. How do you think about all that, and what would you advise people that, in terms of how to deal with that? Because a shoe size could easily have thousands of pages that are hundreds of thousands or millions of pages that don't have a lot of appreciable distinction from one another at a search level where you'd want to carry all those pages in the index. Does that make sense?
When you say the word harmful, I immediately try to understand in what way.
Well, it starts to be seen as thin content, or I don't know, too many pages that are essentially very similar to each other. Is there any issue with any of this?
That is not an issue at all.
Yeah.
There's the one thing that I think Marie and I have raised this a bunch of times online and offline, and John talks about it as well. The one and only thing, and the whole reason, going back to the WordPress creating 15 different versions of a URL, the only thing we potentially care about is our ability to crawl stuff, right? And in fact, we have the ability to crawl all sorts of stuff, but we don't want to crawl your site into the ground. So you want to be able to control how much valuable stuff you're offering up for crawling, so we don't miss the new amazing shoes that you're going to show, tomorrow, because you have 15 copies of the same old shoe from yesterday. That's the only real reason to kind of think about this a little bit. Even that is not harmful, because eventually I'd say, we'll get to the new shoe anyway. And
right, but I have all my shoes. Here are all the red ones, and here are all the blue ones, here are all the green ones, here are all the brown ones, all the same models. The only thing I'm doing is changing. Oh, and of all those, I've got size 6, 8, 10, 12.
I see where you're going. I see where you're going.
Let Google index all of those. Let's not bother with canonicals. Let's not bother with anything like that. Let's just throw them all in there. I want to rank for every variant of every shoe term ever heard.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I get this a lot in the Hangouts as well. So essentially, you're kind of trying to balance making one really strong page with pages that are individually valuable on your own. That's kind of the balance that you want to find. So you want to make sure that the page can kind of stand on its own, that it has its own reason for kind of existing, and that you don't overdo it with all of these variations. So for a shoe store, you probably just want to split that up by model, and one page per model, for example. There might be situations where you say, well, this specific color scheme is really, really important, and it's what differentiates this shoe, which is the same model, from the other shoe that I have. And in a case like that, each those variations kind of stand on their own, and they're valuable on your own. So you'd want to have separate pages for that. So it's not something where you can say, well, I'll just generate all variations and Google will figure it out. I mean, sure, we'll figure it out, but we'll have a hard time understanding how important that individual variation is because it's just kind of spread so far. So
Right.
I try to really focus on something that's unique and valuable on its own, that it can really stand on its own.
Right. So it's not really a matter of thinking of it from the point of view of you're doing something wrong necessarily, as you're making it hard for Google to focus on the pages that have the most distinct value that you really should get them focused on.
Yeah, exactly. So in a case like that, if someone searches for, I don't know, shoe stores online or whatever, and we have every size on separate URLs, then we'll have a hard time figuring out which one is actually the right one to show. But on the other hand, if you put each model into a separate page and you search for shoe store online, then maybe we just have like 50 different versions to show, and we can say, well, out of these 50, we can make a reasonable selection and kind of show that to people. So finding a way to concentrate into something that can stand on its own without being too generic in that you have one page for shoes and it lists all of the shoes on there, that's probably not really helpful for users either.
Right.
The other thing that I guess comes up here, which Andrey also mentioned, is kind of the general crawl budget, as people call it, where when you have all of these different variations, we have to go out and actually crawl that. So Andrey touched upon that. And specifically, if you have a site where you have new content from time to time, if you have a site where new content is important, then that's something you might want to watch out for. On the other hand, for a shoe store, those shoe models are going to remain relevant for, I don't know, years or months at least. So it's not a matter if we crawl them today or if we crawl them next week. It's like, it doesn't really matter. They'll get indexed at some point, and we'll be able to get them there.
Yep, fair enough. Yeah, no, we've seen great gains with many sites with helping them square these kinds of issues away. Page glut by either canonicals or just re-implementing the page so it doesn't even generate a new URL when you're flipping colors or things like that.
Bill, did you have a next question?
I just looked over my list, and I think all the ones I have written down are duplicates of things that have been asked before, which is a problem. But I can come up with a new one real quick, which is, can you tell us about the value of XML sitemaps and how creating a XML sitemap index can help make sure that content on your site gets crawled that might be avoided otherwise?
There's definitely a lot of value in creating XML sitemaps, right? Because that is consistently a question that I get asked a lot, and I think all of us do. It is, to my knowledge, one of the best, if not the best, way of letting Google know about all of your content, and specifically new content that appears on your website. It's something that we look at on a regular basis for every website, and it's a source that we rely on, for a lot of, well, for discovery. So I would definitely say go ahead and do that. You need to start worrying about having an index of all your sitemaps only if you really have so many pages that you can fit them all into one. And I guess, well, then you just have to read up on the technical aspects of that and make sure you implement everything correctly. And it does help to the extent that it allows us then, if you have so many sitemaps that we have to discover the sitemaps first, then obviously an index sitemap also helps. The other question I get asked about this, how much do I need to play with additional parameters inside a sitemap, the priority score, that sort of stuff. That I wouldn't maybe look at to such a great degree, to such a great depth. What really matters is that you make sure that new stuff that appears, new products that get launched, new articles that get written, they get added on a reasonably automated basis. So you are sure that as soon as something new appears, you give Google a chance and other search engines to come and find it.
Okay, this is kind of where I want to go because crawl is such a big part of this. we started looking at crawl priorities years ago, and this was always a part of Google that fascinated me, the sheer logistics of grabbing 1 billion documents without knocking down servers all over the internet, because Google can crawl faster than most sites can serve. Always struck me as just sheer genius to manage, but such a nightmare as well. Where you have to not only crawl every document that exists, but where you want to be hitting top news sites every 10 to 15 minutes to kind of pick up their latest headlines, where you want the Twitter stream coming in live, where you want some things, you know, you're having to grab them multiple times an hour or certainly a day, and yet other things, you know what, it hasn't changed in 3 years. I probably don't need to grab that as often. This is something that the technical side of SEO does need to be aware of, and it is a hard thing sometimes to grasp. How does duplicate content affect overall crawl priorities? Is it a thing where if Google is finding the same pages, you know, again and again, it may lessen the crawl? But more importantly, if Google is wasting the time it has got to hit your site in between hitting the billions of other sites, and it's grabbing essentially the same page, is that a real waste for the webmaster, and should he be doing more to make sure it's getting important differentiated content each time? So a bit of a complex question.
Let me add to that. I admit my jaw dropped the first time I received a message from Google that said too many URLs on your website. It's like
So when it comes to crawling, someone recently did a presentation, I think also in Australia, where you were, Jen. I don't know, Dawn Anderson. She put together a really nice presentation with like tons of technical details on how Googlebot crawls, and a lot of that is really insightful. I thought that was like one of the best presentation I've seen really about crawling. So if you're interested in that, I definitely take a look at that. And we do work really hard to try to figure out how often to crawl pages individually. And some of these pages, we have to crawl them every couple of seconds because they really change very frequently. Other pages change fairly rarely. So kind of finding that balance is really hard. With the sitemap, with RSS feeds, with Atom feeds, we can kind of get information from the site owner about when these pages change. But it's still a matter of actually being able to pick up the changes quickly enough so that we can be relevant in search, but not so fast that we actually knock the server over, or that we kind of run things into the ground by crawling all of these duplicates.
Yeah. So where do I go with that one? How important an issue is crawl priority generally in the overall picture of duplicate content these days? It does seem to me, as Eric indicated earlier, that more and more often I'm getting clients that are coming to me. They've had years of being told, oh, you should be blogging, oh, you should have news archives, oh, you should have more content, more content, more content, fresh content, it ranks better. And you know, they've bought into this, and now they have a 30,000 page site, of which only 50 pages are actual product and business pages, and they have around about the priority, you know, the authority in the overall scheme of the web to have maybe 1,000 of that 30,000 pages actually crawled on a regular schedule. I mean, is this a thing Google has noticed themselves?
Yeah, I wouldn't see that ratio as being problematic. So that's something, when we think about like 30,000 pages, I think when I talk to the Googlebot engineers, they're like, well, we do that for lunch. So it's not the case that we'd be kind of limited by a site that has 30,000 pages instead of 3,000 pages. Sometimes what I see is when there's a combination of like a slower server and really lots and lots of duplicate content, where I'm looking at like hundreds or 200 times every page that we find, then that kind of gets into a problem. But when we're looking at like 30, 40 copies of the same page even, I mean, it feels like a lot, but servers nowadays are pretty robust. They need to be able to handle that. And some amount of duplication kind of comes by default anyway when you start looking at AMP pages where you have the duplicate, when you have separate mobile pages, when you have different language or different country pages, you kind of create more and more duplication anyway. So you can't really say, well, you should have only just one copy of this content. You kind of automatically at least have a couple already, and then some technical issues on the side, and you're like maybe 20, 30 times the number of pages. So that's something that, from my point of view, we need to be able to handle. And servers nowadays, they're pretty robust. It's really rare that I see a case where I'd say, well, maybe you should consider moving to a faster server. Maybe you need to figure out a way to kind of get that duplicate content under control. That's really, really rare.
I think there was kind of a different aspect to Ammon's question, though, which is, and Ammon, correct me if I'm wrong, but when you talked about the 1,000-page site, it was like the site had the authority level that suggested that Google will regularly look at 1,000 pages. But it's a 30,000-page site. Is that, like, shouldn't they just kind of make that a smaller site?
Guys, not for this reason, right? You might want to get rid of old stuff, like you might want to get rid of any kind of old stuff in your life, but not for the reason that we wouldn't be able to crawl it. Because if we've crawled it in the past, we have it. If it doesn't change, we don't need to recrawl it again. So you're kind of fine with that. We probably won't crawl it that often anyway, but that's not a problem for you because you don't want us to. So you're good, you know. It's if you are generating, as John said, 50 copies of every page, and you're generating 1,000 new pages every day, you might give us some trouble finding the good new stuff. But you know, why would you want to do that? There is the question I want to ask is because it was in the comments here, and I think it's a really interesting one to. We haven't covered it yet. Hala asked us, how does content in HTTP and HTTPS work? And if the site is on HTTP, but if a customer logs in and then goes to the secure version, where the same navigation can be done, but through HTTPS, does this come under duplicate content? And I think the simple answer is no, but maybe we could give a bit more of an in into HTTPS through this.
Yeah, I mean it's another version of the content, right? It's like the second copy, so it's not something where I'd say it's really problematic. I mean, we have to deal with this kind of stuff anyway. It's been around since the beginning of the web, where people had dub and non-dub, and oh my God, you have duplicate content. You have both versions, and you have index HTML and just slash. It's like, oh my God, another copy. But we have to live with that. I mean, that's the way the web is. We kind of have to move on and say, well, we need to find a way to kind of technically handle that. I think
another reason not to adopt HTTPS, for example.
Sorry, I missed.
Definitely not a reason to worry about HTTPS.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
There even used to be a worry during migrations that during the stages of migrations, Google finds a new URL, it's just grabbed the old one. Oh my goodness, Google's just seen duplicate content because it's seen this page as it's on the old URL, and I've just moved it to this one now. And I have seen people literally worry about that kind of thing. I think the general takeaway, and Doc just pulled it up in the comments, is that I think most people are worrying too much about duplicate content for the wrong kind of reasons. The right kind of reasons are, what effect does this have on your customers? How much of your time is being wasted in creating content that's adding nothing new? And really, that most of the rest of it, yeah, there is no such thing as a duplicate content penalty, and most of the things Google can deal with. I still think, sorry, Andrey, but I'm coming at this from the other end, as you know, webmaster of a lot of sites. When you're dealing with a site that's got low priority and it's got a lot of content, that content may never get picked up in Google. It simply just isn't high enough priority. It's buried too far down effectively in the crawl priorities. If I'm getting spidered 10 times in a month, that's 10 pages, and I got a 20-page site. It doesn't matter what's on the other 10 pages if they're not getting seen. It's
one thing I would say to that, and you should never. Well, I mean, I don't know. You can decide how you want to say what you want to say, but I wouldn't want us to think about us being on a different end of this than you guys are. We're at exactly the same end of this. We do want people to create great stuff and for users to find that stuff. So, in that sense, what else would we do? But beyond that point, what I was going to say, if you find examples or if you find cases, any of you, right, or any of the people who are listening to us, where you've created content and your neighbor and any reasonable person would find it interesting, compelling, and useful, and it doesn't seem to be picked up by Google, despite the fact that you have a sitemap, despite the fact that we can navigate to that page, it's not roboted out, let us know about this. That feels like something's going wrong, right? We would probably want to figure out whether we need to change something, whether there's something wrong with the implementation. So those cases are really interesting, and if you come across something like that, please let us know. Right? That's really awesome to learn, but not to worry about it again, right? Because it's fixable.
One quick one, I think it's almost a yes or no. In the past, we had the supplemental index. Now, we know that that's massively changed with Google.
When did we have this? What is this?
Oh, I'm going back 2004, 2005.
Okay. Before Google existed. Okay, good. Before Google existed, there was a supplemental.
Just because you hadn't joined yet doesn't mean it didn't exist. It was around in '99. It was founded in '98. It used to be that you used to worry about content maybe dropping into a supplemental index. It seems, in all practical intents and purposes, that Google no longer has a supplemental index. Instead, it's built of supplemental indexes. The whole of Google is lots and lots of different databases and shards that are coming together at any given point. Is it correct to say, you don't have to worry about when a document was last spidered so much as you used to? You don't have to worry about it falling into a supplemental index.
Yes, that's correct. I mean, that was the case long ago. I think way in the early days, we had the label supplemental index because we thought, oh, we kind of picked this up, but we have no idea what to do with this. We'll maybe show it once or twice in search. But when we dropped that label, and especially in a lot of the other index changes since then, essentially that's just our infrastructure. There's nothing that you can change or that you need to worry about with regards to how your page is indexed. You're basically crawled and indexed, and you're crawled and indexed. It's like you're in there or not.
I think we're pretty much at time. Did anyone have a last question they had to get in before we end, or should we just sort out when we're doing the next one?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm good.
As always, I'll try and drop by the comments for people. If there's any outstanding questions, we will try and catch them. But otherwise,
go ahead with the last questions. Yeah, because questions will never end. It's the last one. Go ahead, Ammon.
Oh no, I think I've covered most of the ones I wanted, really.
Jen, have we heard everything from Jen? I think was there a couple of things you wanted to maybe cover, or did we go over this anyway?
One short and sweet one that comes up periodically when people have duplicate content on their site, like the WordPress tags. What's the best solution for dealing with it? Canonical, no index, redirect, delete.
So from my point of view, you want Google to recognize that it's duplicate content. So you don't want to no index that. You don't want to block it by Robots Txt. You want Google to see that these pages are equivalent and that they're duplicates, because what we can do then is we can fold those signals together and say, well, this is one really strong page with all of these signals. So something like a redirect, the Rel Canonical, that kind of matches. As soon as you start hiding those pages, for example, with a Robots Txt, then any link that goes to that duplicate page gets lost. It's like we don't know what to do with that link. We kind of lose that additional information about that content. But if we can recognize that it's duplicate and we can fold it together, we can keep that. Oh my
Sorry
God.
about that.
That's the time, right?
Yeah, I'm plugging one half of my phone system.
Just as a quick follow-up to that, it's very related. Is there anything Canonical doesn't do? I mean, Canonical is a great tool that Google gave us, but is there anything it won't fix?
It won't fix the telephone.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you.
But one thing to keep in mind, Canonical for us is a hint. It gives us additional information. It's not a directive. So you will sometimes see situations where you say, I have this as a Canonical. Why did you choose the other one? And we'll look at that and say, well, you gave us a lot of signals, and actually this one has the right signals for us. So it's a hint. It's not a directive.
Right, although we did a test where we looked at thousands of different canonicals across, I think it was 20 different e-commerce sites, and we found it was extremely rare that you didn't take the hint.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times when you bother to set a canonical, you bother to fix like the internal navigation as well, or you make sure that like the www, non-www versions are right, or HTTP, HTTPS stuff is set up correctly. So it's almost a sign that you're spending time focusing on this, but sometimes we see people set it up in weird ways.
Right.
Okay, guys, we've been more than an hour, and obviously we can go ahead. I'm free till next Thursday. What about you? Okay, yeah, I guess we're out of time, and thank you very much for all of you. Thank you very much for all of been watching us, and will watch us in the recording. We know that the recording will go for a long time. Okay, and I'll start doing personal thank you. Okay, I'll thank Andrey Lipattsev from Ireland, from Irish office Google. Well, we can see he's from Google. He lives there actually. He lives there, and actually every Googler has to have a Google on the wall. Yeah. Okay. So John is from Office, obviously, because there is no Google behind here. Thank you very much, John. You were first time, but hopefully not the last time. Okay. Jen was first time. How do you feel?
It was awesome. It was really great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. I hope we'll have more of you. Eric done many things with us, and we go to Bill. Thank you very much, Bill, for being with us. And I just have to say that Bill and Ammon were originally experts on the panel. Only two survived, and obviously was Andrey Lipattsev, who managed to survive, actually, surprisingly. Okay, thank you very much, guys. So now we're going off air. If you want to say hi, Mom, I'm on tele, you can do that. We're going off air.